Ready?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Welcome back to the Brewer Fanatic podcast. We are your hosts, Jack Stern and Spencer Michaelis, coming to you each week to recap all things Brewers. We got a couple more series to talk to you about tonight. Well, one and 2/3, I guess, seeing as based on the time we're recording this, the scheduling is a little funky for us anytime that there's no off days on a Thursday, because we usually try to time this out with having it come out the morning of a new series starting. But the Brewers are currently on the West Coast, and they are playing their final game against the Angels tonight. So Wednesday night is we're recording this. So we'll have some updates from what we know so far from that game. But for the most part, we're going to be just focusing on, I guess, 5 out of the 6 games here that we're going to be covering. But the week started for the Brewers. Well, actually, before I dive into that, Spencer, I forgot to ask you how you're doing. I'm sorry. That was really rude of me.
Yeah, well, I'm doing better now that you asked. I was going to be
Okay.
pretty hurt, but I'm
Yeah.
doing all right now.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm good. Definitely. This is going to be a late night for us. So,
Well,
but first, how are you doing, Jack? I should make sure I
I'm
reciprocate.
I'm doing okay. I'm doing okay. You mentioned it's going to be a long night for us, so maybe we can try to dive into this and get through it a little bit quicker than we normally do. You know, not that we're trying to
We'll
rush
see.
anything, of course. We love sitting here and talking about baseball for 2 hours or however long this program usually runs. Hour and a half, I think, is what we're kind of sitting at right now.
That's
But we'll
about it.
start by talking about the series that the Brewers wrapped up at home against the Cincinnati Reds. It was a division rivalry series, and the Brewers winning that one 2-1. And then as of this recording, they've split the first 2 games of that Angels series. And right now they're currently up 1-0 in, is it still the top of the 5th in Anaheim right now?
Heading to the bottom of the 5th right now.
Okay. But really, the theme as we kind of look back through this week, I guess, before we even dive into the games, I kind of want to just start with this point. The Brewers have not played good, complete baseball really this entire month of June now. Like we're getting into the final 10 days of the month here. And it really all kind of started with that White Sox series. They swept that series, but each of those last 2 games, which really kicked off the month of June, they did not really win them in convincing fashion. They kind of took advantage of a lot of mistakes that the White Sox made. Then they got swept by the Phillies, beat the Tigers, and that was a decent series, especially that first game. But really, out of all the games they played this month, it was really just that first game of that Tigers series where it was a really well played all around baseball game. It was a 10-0 romping in that first game. Then they really just have kind of been in this spot where they're not playing very complete baseball. They're not hitting with runners in scoring position. They're really not hitting for a whole lot of power. The pitching has been okay, but I would argue it hasn't been great either. They're really in this stretch right now where they're getting the one big hit that they need more often than not. And then on the run prevention side, it's really the defense that's carrying this team right now. That feels like the only thing that the Brewers have done well this month. And it's really not funny, but really interesting to see how that's been able to carry them through this stretch. They still have a winning record in June, I believe. It might go to, if they lose tonight, I think it's still one more win than
I
loss in the
believe
month of
so. Yep.
June. So this has kind of been an interesting stretch to watch because I don't think they've played good baseball, but they're really just being held up by the defense right now. And as we get to this Angels series in a few minutes, I don't think it's any coincidence that the one game that was really a bad loss in this stretch also happened to be the game where the defense kind of fell apart a little bit. So kind of interesting to walk through this, but we'll break down each game here to kind of explain kind of what we're seeing. But starting with the series against the Reds, the Brewers taking 2 of 3 from their division rival at home. That's the 7th straight series win that the Brewers have had now during this kind of run that they're on this year. Game 1, however, was the only game of the series that the Reds took. It was Reds 6, Brewers 5, and this was a frustrating one. I actually think you could make a case that this is one of the most frustrating losses of the year for the Brewers, just with the way that everything unfolded. It started with Freddie Peralta not setting the tone very well. We've talked a lot about just the areas that need to grow for him and what he's been struggling with. I think we kind of started talking about it even before the results consistently started to hit a rough patch. And it's really unfolded now during this stretch. But in this game, it was just a continuation of the struggles he's had. 5 1/3 innings, he allowed 10 hits. That was the most hits he's allowed in a game in his career. 6 earned runs, a walk, 6 strikeouts, 2 home runs allowed. And this one was at least a little interesting because I do think he threw the ball quite a bit better than he had in Detroit in his last start. But still, just not a great showing for him. There were still some instances of, getting into deeper counts than he needs to, missing his spots with pitches. The command wasn't great. But he did say after the game he thought he pitched a little better than the line indicated. I would be inclined to agree with that. I don't think he pitched 6 earned runs bad. I don't think he was great either. But I guess that just kind of leads us into our first question. One of the themes in this game, however, was the amount of damage that Freddie gave up on fastballs. I believe, and this is something that I had in my notebook during the homestand, so I think I still know what the stat is. I think it was 7 out of 10 hits on the fastball in that start, which is not something we ever see, but it is something we've seen more of this year. So this might be the earliest we've worked a question into an episode. So congratulations to Sam Wolmer for having your question show up within the first, 6 or 7 minutes here. But he asks, what is going on with Freddie Peralta's fastball? He lists a couple numbers, the 269 batting average. These are entering Wednesday, 269 batting average, 449 slugging against a -4 run value. So a pitch that has historically been a plus pitch for a really good pitcher is now a negative for him. So Sam asks, is this just part of the poor command and control that he's featured lately? So kind of talking about just all the stuff we've gone over with him in previous episodes. Just my initial response to the improved production against the fastball, it is unexpected because in terms of characteristics, it's been better than ever this year. It's still sitting at that career high for velo that he set last year. That's been maintained this year. He's added another inch of induced vertical break without raising his arm slot or anything like that. So in terms of vertical approach angle, when he's throwing it up in the zone, it should play even better than it's ever played before. And I kind of looked at some heat maps to see where the damage is coming on Freddie's fastball. A lot of the damage so far this year has been, especially for righties, middle in, or really anything in there. They've even gotten to a couple up and in fastballs. But then you start to look through the data more and actually like comb through each of these at bats and each of these hits. I'm still kind of at this spot where it's still too early in the year for us to dive into that kind of stuff and fully get a good picture of what's happening, because you're still at a point where if you like divide the strike zone up into the 9 boxes like they do on game day and all this stuff, like you're still talking about a sample of like 10 at bats or less for all of these zones against the fastball, which is still, 1 or 2 hits is going to wildly swing that sample. So you really can't read into that right now. But just as I was kind of watching the videos of all these hits, the bottom line is the swings look a lot more comfortable. And at this point, I'm still inclined to think it goes back to what we've talked about, where he just always allows hitters to get into situations where they can feel more comfortable and have more comfortable swings against him. I know there was the pitch tipping concern for him last year. He was doing that in the first half, and once he fixed that, that's when the results really took off for him. And it does kind of remind me of that, because it's like there's nothing in the characteristics that would make you expect these kind of results. The command has not been good. If you go through and you watch a lot of the clips of the hits he's given up on fastballs, he's missed his spot more often than not. But Freddie's also never been a huge, I'm going to perfectly hit my spot guy, even when he's been rolling. It's been better for him during the good stretches, but I would argue it still hasn't been amazing in terms of hitting spots. Good side tangent, by the way. I'd love to find a way to quantify hitting spots, because we don't really have that right now. You just got to kind of watch the video and make a determination for yourself. But I'm still going to say at this point, I don't want to just throw out the, oh, he must be tipping again assumption, because I think that's kind of lazy. But I also don't have a whole lot of a better answer right now. I think it's just that for whatever reason, hitters are obviously much more comfortable against that pitch. And whether that is, there's a cue that guys have picked up on. He has allowed a decent number of base runners with the walks, so maybe he is giving away something on the bases. That was a issue for him in his second start of the year against Seattle. So I haven't actually looked at the with runners on split. That might be an interesting thing to dive into. But I I'm not sure what it is, but the bottom line is the swings look much better. Maybe it's because of a cue. Maybe it's just because of bad sequencing or just putting hitters into situations where they feel more comfortable against him. I'm not sure, but the bottom line is the swings are a lot better.
Yeah. I think I came to a pretty similar conclusion as you did here. I think that even looking at that Reds game, a bunch of them happened on first pitch fastballs too. I believe both of the homers might have been, at least one of them was. And
Yeah.
to me, that's just a sign of teams are just selling out for it and they're going up there and they're just expecting it. And even when it's got good characteristics, I'm going to take it a somewhat different direction here too. The league is getting used to this type of fastball more than it used to be. A lot more pitchers are throwing these fastballs, these types of fastballs with the low vertical approach angle, the higher induced vertical break. It's kind of a thing, and it's a cyclical thing for MLB where pitches come around. The sweeper is a lot less effective than it was when it first showed up on the scene because hitters are used to it now. They see it a lot more. I think that's happening a bit with Freddie's fastball too, is just that hitters have a better idea of how to stay on top of that pitch. Whereas in the past, even though they knew it played up and that it was going to ride, they still were swinging under it just because it was playing tricks on their eyes. But teams kind of train for that type of thing now. So they train you to swing a little bit higher than you're expecting to against these types of guys. So I think that might be playing a bit of a role. I didn't find it. I saw there from Jake McKibben, a Brewer fanatic. He did point out that through May 17th, opponents were slugging 386 against the fastball. And since then, it's 564. In that time, the induced vertical break has gone from 17.2 inches on average to 16 inches on average. So it did drop about an inch, or I guess not drop really, but it's down an inch in induced vertical break. And his arm slot is a little bit lower in that time as well. So who knows if that's actually something that is a big deal, if it's really playing too big of a role. But I do wonder if maybe there's just a slight mechanical tweak that he needs to make to be able to get back to where he was on the fastball earlier in the year or two. But I honestly do think a big chunk of it comes down to hitters just having a better idea of how to hit his type of fastball. And the fact he's not locating it as well, that can be a pretty tough combination to get through as a pitcher.
I think the fact that we're not seeing him locate anything off of that either is also playing a big role. Like, how many times have we seen him get ahead with fastballs and then he spikes a slider or he spikes a changeup? Like, if you as a hitter can essentially eliminate that pitch being in the general vicinity of needing to protect against it, like needing to swing, like if he's not starting any of the secondaries in the strike zone, it becomes very easy to, oh, I see spin, just, not bite, just let it go. And then it becomes a lot easier to sell it for the fastball that way.
Yeah.
They were swinging a lot first pitch and doing damage on first pitch fastballs in that Reds game. I was hoping we'd see more of an adjustment there. But at the same time, that also happened so quickly where you don't necessarily want to make an adjustment because, oh, we had two guys hit a first pitch fastball. So I kind of get why they didn't, go away from that a little bit. And I think it also does come down to, like, Freddie's got to start just locating everything a little bit better. So far in that Angels outing, as far as we know, it's been a little better. I haven't caught any of the game. But depending on where we're at with that, maybe we'll revisit it if we have time. But I talked before about this loss. As a reminder, Reds 6, Brewers 5 in game one, just being frustrating all around. So we talked about Freddie, but then on the offensive side of the ball, it was just a story of wasted opportunities for the Brewers. They went 1 for 16 with runners in scoring position. They left 13 men on base. And basically all the times that they did score were because the Reds essentially wrapped up a run in a neatly tied package and hand delivered it to their doorstep. And even then, the Brewers didn't do a whole lot with those opportunities. So they put up one run in the fifth after a double error by Ellie De La Cruz. So ground ball to short that he bobbled and then essentially threw out of play, I believe.
Yep.
But bottom line, there was an extra base that was taken there. And then the same thing happened in the sixth inning. This time it was Jamer Candelario making a double error. Once again, the Brewers only coming away with one. And then we got to the ninth, and this is where we had a sequence that I think I said this to you as it was going down. That might be one of the single worst sequences of collective decision making that I have seen from the Brewers in quite a long time. Like all parties, players, coaches, whatever. So the Brewers were mounting a rally against Alexis Diaz in that 9th inning, assisted by another error by Ellie De La Cruz. Not Jackson Chourio, Joey Ortiz drew a bases loaded walk against Diaz that made it 6-4. So you've got a struggling closer here who's very clearly on the ropes, and the Brewers obviously having an opportunity to walk this one off. Jake Bauers got the call to pinch run for Rhys Hoskins, and I don't think it was a terrible decision, but you've got Oliver Dunn on the roster. You've got Andrew Monasterio on the roster. Like I think that in the moment, the way this unfolded, a lot of people were unfairly bashing Jake Bauers' base running ability. Like he has average speed, and he has largely been a solid base runner this year with the decisions he's made on the bases. And that's what Pat Murphy said the next day. He's like, we wanted to pinch run the guy who was an experienced base runner who, we just knew wouldn't let that moment get too big for him and he would make smart decisions. But he did say, in hindsight, just considering everything, I do regret it. I would have pinch run, maybe Ollie Dunn or someone like that who's quite a bit faster. But Bauers was the pinch runner. Jackson Chourio hits a single to right. Bauers is sent around third to score what would be the tying run. He's initially called safe, but on replay review, it was pretty clear that he was out.
Yep.
And not a good send. Not a good send. And everyone on the Brewers side was defending the send. Bauers defended the send. Murphy defended the send. But there's also an element of none of these guys are going to throw Jason Lane under the bus publicly. And I don't know what any of them actually thought of the slide. I should clarify that. But there just is the element of like, you're going to get the supportive answer in these situations publicly, regardless of how they actually feel about it. Maybe they did think it was a fine slide or fine send. Bad send, though. You got a guy, again, like guy who's on the ropes. You're stringing something together. Bauers is not likely to score there. You have one out. If it's 2 outs, it's a good send. 1 out, no. And granted, there is still the element of you did force the Reds to make a play, and they made the play. Like it was still, Bauers was out by a good bit, but it wasn't like to the point where he was only halfway down the line when the play was being made. And
Right.
It was a decent throw. It was a solid tag. Like they had to make a play, but just it does not make sense to send him there. And then Blake Perkins comes up now with 2 outs and tries to bunt for a hit, and he pops it up, and that's the ball game. So what was a promising rally for the Brewers essentially fizzled out in about 120 seconds. And it was just this sequence of, like I said, just collectively bad decision-making by basically everybody in that situation.
Yeah, that was a very frustrating game. For the most part in the regular season, I'm not going to get very worked up during a game. Like, obviously, I'm excited when good things happen, and you feel a little bit upset when stuff happens, but I'm not going to leave the end of a game and be like, man, that sucked. Like I felt that way after Friday's game. Like it was just a terrible way to end it. I do agree. I do think for Bauers, people are underestimating his base running ability. He's stolen a decent amount of bases this year. I know he got picked off at one point this week too, and I'm sure people are pointing to that in this moment too, but he has been a good base runner this year. And I think he was pretty wide when they showed the home plate angle of him coming home. So I'm guessing he didn't cut the base great coming around third. But either way, the point remains with 1 out. It's just not a good send regardless. Benson, I don't think has a cannon of an arm, but he's certainly not like Yelich out there in the outfield making that throw. Like this is a decent arm. Just not a good decision. Funny enough, the Perkins bunt looked absolutely terrible because he popped it up. And I will say, I don't agree with it, but I don't hate the logic behind him trying to lay one down there with 2 outs. I don't think the defense is super expecting that in that moment, but he executed it terribly, and it looks really, really bad once you pop it up, and it's an easy out to end the game. But sneaking that in that situation, I don't think there's a chance that could have worked, and I wouldn't have been shocked by it. In reality, though, I would like to see him confident enough to want to hit in that moment, and it sounded like that he ended up bunting because he wasn't really. He said trying to be the hero. To me, that sounds a little bit more like someone who was a little nervous in that spot and thought, you know what, I could move the line along here, not have to risk striking out or doing something here. Not a great decision, I guess, in the end, but I can at least see it. I don't hate it as much as other people do, at least. But generally, just a really, really rough way to win or to lose a game that they probably didn't have any real. They shouldn't have been in that spot with a chance to win it. But when you are, and then you can't capitalize on all those mistakes, it's frustrating for sure.
I do want to give some credit to Blake Perkins before we move on here to the next game. To be in a spot like that and to then go and face all of us in the media like 30 minutes later, he came out. He was super polite, super articulate, took all of our questions, answered every single one of them earnestly, and just kind of laid it out like, look, man, I made a bad decision. I made a mistake. I screwed up. Here's what I was thinking. And his logic wasn't terrible. Like you said, he said, basically, I didn't want to try to be the hero or, make a bad, it was almost like he was too afraid of making a bad decision or taking a bad swing or something. Like he didn't want to come up and just strike out on 3 pitches or something along those lines. He said, I didn't want to be the hero. He said, I wanted to get an opportunity for the top of the order behind me. I thought there was a good chance the defense was not going to expect a play like this. So if I get it down, we get a run in, top of the orders coming up now. We're in a good spot. And again, not terrible logic. And to be able to come out to us after a moment like that and to handle it the way he did, to explain it the way he did, to own up to a mistake that he made, he deserves a lot of credit for that because that's not easy to do. And it says a lot about the character of Blake Perkins. So he deserves some credit for that. And fortunately for him, he was able to redeem himself pretty quickly as this series continued. We'll move on to game 2 here. The Brewers taking this one by a score of 3-1. All 3 runs scoring on a Joey Ortiz 5th inning home run. Jared Koenig got to open in this one, and then Bryce Wilson was the bulk guy. The Reds having a lot of either left-handed bats or switch hitters at the top of the order, and many of those hitters, you're probably in a better spot if you get them from the right side versus hitting from the left side. So that was the rationale there. And it worked. Bryce Wilson giving the Brewers 5 1/3 of bulk work, 3 hits allowed, no runs, 2 walks, 6 Ks. This is where we come back to the point that I talked about before at the start of this episode about I don't think the Brewers have actually pitched that well lately. I think it's been the defense doing a lot of the heavy lifting, and this was a really good example. The Reds against the Brewers in this game had a 63.6% hard hit rate and an expected batting average of 290. They only got 5 hits, though, which was a 166 batting average for this game. And essentially, Wilson did have 6 strikeouts, which is more than we've usually seen from him. So I think in some ways this was one of his better starts in terms of executing pitches. But at the same time, the Reds were basically hitting missiles this entire game, and the Brewers were making plays on them. So despite the 1 run, I'm not going to call this a good pitching performance. I think the defense did a lot of the lifting here, and it ranged from snagging line drives in the outfield. I believe this was the game where Churio made the catch in right, didn't he? As he was going back. So that was a really nice play. That was in the 1st inning, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Because that was because Koenig opened this game, and Koenig faced.
I think that was the first play of the game.
Yeah, because Koenig faced 3 guys, I think it was, and it was basically 3 missiles off of him.
Yeah.
Which is probably part of the reason why Pat Murphy pulled the plug on him pretty quickly. He only got the 2 outs.
Yep.
Wilson came in, got the 6 strikeouts, but also, again, a lot of both missiles to the outfield, but also just some ground balls that were absolutely smoked. That even if you didn't have to range for it, just to be able to pick a ball that's hit 110 miles an hour, that's not an easy thing to do. And the Brewers did it pretty much flawlessly the entire game. Willie Adames made some nice plays, getting around some hard grounders too.
Yeah.
And ranging for them. Murphy pointed that out in the post game. this is a game that was won by the defense more than anything else. And I think this is a really good example of what we're talking about. Like, the Brewers are winning games on defense right now, essentially, more than anything else, because I don't think they're doing anything else well right now.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like really the defense felt like they had to show out for Snoop Dogg. We went past that a little too quick for my liking.
I didn't even write that in the notes. I guess that shows you how much that meant to me versus some other people. But the vibes
I noticed you weren't in the
vibes
pictures
were good at
with
the
him.
ballpark.
I noticed you weren't in the pictures with him and the other media members.
No, I
noticed.
wasn't. I was invited to go down, but I decided to stay up in the press box and eat my ice cream. So,
well, all right, you might have sold me on that second part, but
someone also had to get a creeper picture of, you know, Kurt and Wags and all the other guys who were down there when they were getting the pictures. So I still contributed in some way.
That's fair. All right, fair enough.
But, yeah.
No, but Snoop was actually awesome on the mic, and that was very fun. That half inning, or those inning and a half, I think, maybe even 2 full innings he was announcing. It went so fast. He was so fun. But yeah, back to the defense and back to what we were talking about. It was just fantastic in this game. You talked about the Cheerio play. Ortiz hit the 3-run homer, but he also had some pretty nice plays over at third base in this one, as he just continues to do. Speaking of, I was looking at his Savant page and realized that when he first, like the first few weeks when he was splitting time, his outs above average were actually in the negative, and now he's in like the 95th percentile for a third baseman. Like, it backs up the eye test now, what we've been seeing. Like, he's been fantastic defensively. So yeah, it was all defense. There were so many hard hit outs. We'll move on to the next game, but it continues, and it's been happening a lot lately.
Yeah, there's a reason why I said that at the beginning of the episode, because I do think it runs through most of these games that they're playing right now. But yeah, first, I'm going to yell at you. First, I'm going to yell at you for looking at outs above average 2 weeks into the year. Why are you looking at any defensive metrics?
Okay,
2 weeks into the year?
I'm not saying 2 weeks into the year. It was like end of April, but it was when he was splitting time, and I was curious what it looked like.
All right. Game 3, the Brewers barely hanging on to this one, 5-4. Colin Ray going 6 solid innings, 4 hits, 3 runs, 2 of them earned. You could argue that all 3 should have been earned, because the error in this game was an ill-advised pickoff move. Well, actually, 2 errors in this game. One on a pickoff throw to first, and then the one that was really ill-advised was trying to pick off Elly De La Cruz in, I believe it was a 2-strike count with 2 outs.
Yep, it sure was.
And granted, that's probably not Ray's decision, but whether it was,
I was just gonna say,
whether
you
it was
could even
William
see on the broadcast. Sorry, I'll talk. You could see on the broadcast that Contreras pointed to second to tell him, and I think Willie had run into second. So I'm blaming those two more than Ray on it. Granted, the throw was not good. I would have liked to have seen Adames make a little bit of a better effort to get a glove on it, though, too. It didn't feel like it was as far away as he made it seem, but it was just a dumb play by everybody involved. If it was 3-0 first and second, sure, that might be the time to try and sneak in a out and get out of an inning, but it was 0-2 or 1-2 on Candelario with 2 outs. He should not be that much of a concern for you in that moment. Elly shouldn't be. Like, just go get the batter and the inning's over. No matter what happens, if you get the batter, inning's over. You're just opening yourself up to a problem. And yeah, Elly will make you pay for those mistakes, because he is a freak athlete and very, very fast, and also very aggressive and willing to take chances in that type of spot. So that was a frustrating play.
It was a very bad call. No matter who the base runner is, you don't need to be especially concerned about him when you're in a put away count with 2 outs, because at that point, excuse me, at that point, it really doesn't matter what you do, or what he does, I should say. It doesn't matter what that base runner does. Execute your pitch, get out of the inning. You know, everything's hunky dory. But otherwise, a nice day for Colin Ray. But again, the Brewers making some nice plays behind him on some well-struck balls, including a lot of deep fly balls in this one. I think he had one inning where it was like 3 fly balls to the warning track. So it, you know, again, we're kind of seeing a little bit of that. The Brewers breaking through to take the lead in the 6th inning. When Lucas Sims came into the game, he relieved Andrew Abbott with a couple men on base. Willie Adames got a first pitch slider at the knees middle. Willie Adames took that slider at the knees middle and launched a 3-run home run that gave Milwaukee the lead. And then Christian Yelich hitting a bunt single in the 7th inning to provide an insurance run. That insurance run ended up mattering because we got to the 9th inning. Adames made a throwing error with 1 out, and that put a runner on second. And the Brewers then intentionally walked Elly De La Cruz to face Santiago Espinal for the hopeful final out of the game. And I guess if you really wanted to be technical, you could say that they wouldn't have needed this final play here if Willie makes that throw. But at the same time, you put a free runner on there, and Trevor McGill's in the game. Threw a hittable pitch to Santiago Espinal, and Espinal lined it to center field. Blake Perkins coming in on it, gunning him down at the plate for the final out, the runner that is, and that is how the Brewers won this one. So a web gem to finish it off. William Contreras was down on the play because he kind of took a swipe to the head, but he ended up being fine, cleared all the concussion testing. Missed a game just as a precaution, but everything checks out with him. This was a really, really good play by Blake Perkins. Spencer, I'm going to ask you first. What was your reaction as you were watching this go down?
Well, first of all, and this ended up there was a story behind this, but my first reaction was, how was Perkins that close to getting there? Because it was not hit that far out of the infield. Turns out right before that pitch, or at least a couple pitches before, Quentin Berry had adjusted him over towards right center and in quite a bit. That paid off really, really well. That was extremely important in this play. But as the ball was falling, I was almost in the same mind of what Perkins talked about after the game, which was, man, I don't know if he should dive for this or try to make the play and throw it, because you knew that was going to be, it was either you dive, and if you dive and miss, Elly's scoring, because he was going on the crack of the bat from first base, like he's scoring and you're going to be down. But if you dive and catch it, obviously the game's over and you win. I do think, regardless of if he would have got to it or not, it was the right decision to pull up like he did. Whether he'd thrown him out at the plate, it was the right decision, what he did. But that was just an incredible play. And I know you will probably talk about this because Murph answered your question on it, but I loved his answer on this play, talking about how a soft hit ball in center, especially, it's just really hard to create that momentum or that energy, I think is how he phrased it, towards home. And when I was very young, I played some center field and some outfield. But obviously my brother does now. And like, that is always the case, even though it's more shallow, those softer hit balls are the harder ones to throw. They really are, because when it's hit pretty hard, you're like, you have all your momentum coming in. The ball just goes into your glove. You can kind of all at once just make a motion. He almost threw it like an infielder, like pivoting when he got this, because he had to almost backhand it and get it out right away up the line, maybe a few feet, but the right line to throw it up. You want it to be up the third base line if you're going to miss either direction, and just led William right into the tag. And great job by William to hold on to it, because that is a tough play. He got his head taken out a little bit on the slide. I loved his little smirk on the ground towards that the camera got a very good view of, but
that's going to be a good screen cap for the rest of the year.
Yeah. Especially now that we know he didn't actually get concussed or anything, and that wasn't just like a completely woozy William Contreras looking around. But that was a fantastic play all the way around. Perkins could not have played it better than he did, and it sounds like the whole coaching staff put him in a good position, especially Barry, to make that play, and that's important. I mean, that's the difference between an out at the plate or him having to take 3 more steps as the ball is hitting the ground and he's scoring at that point. So that's really important that Barry had the scouting report down on him, got him moved in. I will credit Murph for walking Elly as well, or at least I agreed with that. I would have done that as well. At first I was like, oh, they can't walk him because Candelario's on deck. And then I remembered he had been pinch run for. So then I was like, oh, please walk him. Elly terrifies me, and I don't know if he should. His numbers don't really point to a guy that should be that scary to me, but he scares me just like he apparently scares the Brewers. So I was happy not to see him up in that spot. Espinal did his job, but just a fantastic play by Perkins.
Good redemption for Perk too on the back end of this series. I think it just goes to show, like, kind of like this is what Murphy talked about after that first game with the bunt attempt. Like, these are young players. In Perkins' case, he's not quite as young as some other guys, but in terms of experience, he's very much in that group still. And, you're going to make mistakes, but at the same time, these are guys who are valuable parts of our team. and they're going to continue to get opportunities, and they're going to help us win baseball games. And Blake Perkins doing exactly that in the series finale here, just kind of reinforcing why he's so valuable in center field. And I would imagine he's still going to continue holding down that role, even if Garrett Mitchell gets a little closer to a return here, just between the way the glove has been. And even the bat has kind of been hovering around league average for most of the season. And when you have that combination, you have a very, very valuable player. Like, I don't think people have really realized this. Blake Perkins, I think, is he still in the top 5 in the NL for outfield WAR?
If he's not, he's like 6 or 7. Yeah, he's still
like
up there.
He's up there, and it's very big part of the success the Brewers have had this year, particularly in securing this series win. We're now going to move on to the series that remains in progress in Anaheim against the Angels. The Brewers have split the first 2 games of that series. Rubber match is still in progress. We'll provide a scoring update when we get there, even though it's probably not relevant for anyone who's listening at this point. But we'll walk through game 1 first. Angels 5, Brewers 3. And I guess we'll start at the beginning of this one. Jake Bauers giving the Brewers an early lead with a 2-run home run in the second. But then the Angels scored a combined 5 runs, so all 5 of their runs across the third and fourth innings. And this is what I talked about before, where I don't think it was a coincidence that the game where the defense sputtered was the game that the Brewers didn't win. So Carlos Rodriguez getting the ball in this one for his second career big league start. 4 2/3 for him, 5 hits, 5 runs, 4 of them earned, a couple of walks, 3 Ks, and a homer. We'll start with the defense in that third inning. Sal Frelick struggled to feel the ball off the sidewall in right field. That would become a theme in this series. That wall gave some people trouble down the right field line, but Sal couldn't come up with it, and that turned it into an RBI triple. I believe that scored the first run for the Angels. And then as that inning progressed, there was a roller toward first down the line. Bryce Terang decided to cover the bag on this one. That's not Bryce Terang's play, but Bryce decided to cover the bag on this one. So what essentially ended up happening here was Jake Bauers fielded the ball, and I think he was expecting Rodriguez to be there on the cover. Instead, Terang is there. So Rodriguez kind of stopped in his tracks. Terang also kind of stopped in his tracks. And Bauer's flip, which was not a bad flip, it just kind of sailed right between the two guys who were both looking at each other. And it goes as an error on Bauers, but to me, this is Bryce Terang's fielding misplay.
Yes.
Because 1, this is normally not a play where you're going to be the guy covering the bag. And then number 2, if you are going to decide to cover the bag here, you got to communicate that. And if you go back and watch the replay, it didn't look like he said anything throughout this whole play.
No, it was 100% on Terang. I even tweeted it at the time, but like exactly what you said, if you're covering a base that isn't supposed to be yours, you better make it clear everyone knows you are covering that base. Otherwise, what is everyone going to expect? Like you talked about, Rodriguez is looking up and he sees Terang there, but Bauers is looking down to field the ball. He looks up and he sees Rodriguez, who he's flipping the ball to lead him to the base. So I actually saw a couple of the tweets were blaming Bauers for it. I was like, I don't know what Bauers is supposed to do.
No.
If Terang had been screaming, like, I'm here, or something, and then he flipped it poorly, sure, maybe. But even then, there was just no real good reason for Terang to take the base. And he didn't just stand in the vicinity. He had his foot on the base, in the middle of the base, like ready to get the toss. And then I think he worried that Rodriguez was going to run through the base as well, and they both took their eye off it. And then we know what happened. But yeah, that was Terang for me, and it's not even. There's no discussion. I think it's completely on him.
You can kind of break this down too from the lens of this is Carlos Rodriguez's second MLB start. Like if you're going to cover the bag there, and then you see the more established elite defensive second baseman running to cover the bag. Like, of course, you're going to, peel off and assume that this is his play. You're not trying to disrupt him as he's trying to make a play. But again, that he shouldn't have been over there for starters. And then also, like at that point, if you are going to decide that you're covering on this, you got to make it known and call everybody else off. So not a great play by Bryce Terang. He's obviously been a fantastic defender over the last year and a half now, but this play in particular, I think, is on him.
Yep.
But that wasn't the only thing that was shaky in this game. Rodriguez, he was okay early on. I thought it was fine. The command was not good on the whole on the night. You could see he was missing a lot of spots. He missed a couple spots when he got ahead as well. The 2-run home run by Zach Neto, though, in the fourth inning, that really kind of delivered the blow for the Brewers here and put the Angels on top for good. I don't think it was a bad pitch. It was a 2-strike pitch that was essentially, it was a little bit towards the inner third of the zone, and it was like at the very top of the strike zone. Maybe you can make the case that with 2 strikes, it should be above the strike zone. But I don't think it was a bad pitch. Like, he just got on top of the ball, and I think you do have to give him some credit for that. I don't know if you saw the home run pitch and what your reaction was.
Yeah. The only thing I would say is that Neto is very much known for being able to get to high fastballs. Like, it's one of his best traits as a hitter.
Mm-hmm.
Over the course of he's pretty much been up for a full season now, and like his hot zones are mostly up and in. So that was where he likes to see the ball.
So you're going to say like bad pitch calling?
Yeah, I think the call was supposed to be away and up, if I remember right. Like in terms of most hitters, yeah, that would have been a fine pitch. I think for Neto specifically, it is kind of where he likes it. So it still wasn't a terrible pitch because it's not like it caught the thighs and was over the heart, but it still isn't exactly where I would want to attack Neto in that spot.
Base running was also shaky for the Brewers. In this one, Gary Sanchez doubled to lead off the fifth. Very next play, there's a ground ball to short, hit by Blake Perkins. Gary breaks for third, is thrown out after a rundown, and then I want to say it was like before the next pitch, Perkins is immediately picked off of first base by Zach Plesac. So 2 outs made on the bases there, immediately followed by a Bryce Terang solo homer. And if you assume that if Gary holds that second, Perkins is just thrown out at first, then it's a home run that I believe puts the Brewers within 1.
Yeah.
But instead it was only a solo shot, so that's pretty impactful there. The Brewers then, not taking advantage of a situation a couple innings later, they put runners on second and third with no outs in the 7th inning. Sanchez, Perkins, and Terang all strikeouts swinging against Luis Garcia, who I will say threw some pretty good splitters during that sequence. So it definitely not easy at bats, but still another missed opportunity and something that's become a theme for the Brewers offensively in the month of June. So that was a little bit frustrating, but Milwaukee dropping this game 5-3. Moving on to game 2, Brewers 6, Angels 3. Christian Yelich starting this one out in the first inning with his 200th career home run. He got to enjoy a beer shower afterward in which an ice cream sandwich was thrown at him. Adam McCalvey wrote about that more at MLB.com if you want to hear the full tale of the ice cream sandwich. Jackson Chourio played a big role in this one, driving in the other 5 runs for the Brewers in this game. In the 3rd inning, he hit what was ruled a double plus error down the line. He went all the way around the bases in 14.7 seconds. I believe that was the fastest home-to-home time of any runner this year. I know that initially they reported it as 14.75, and they said that was the fastest. Was it still the fastest after the 14.7 adjustment?
When it went down in time, yes, it was.
It was still okay.
Well, but yeah, so showing Jack, come on. Let's think about it for a second.
Showing off the speed there, and I know you personally thought that this should have been ruled an inside the Parker because if I'm remembering correctly, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but if I'm remembering correctly what you told me behind the scenes, to you, this was essentially the same as the Sal play, which was not ruled as an error.
Right. I don't know that I would say I don't think it was an error, but I think if you called Sal's not an error, then this one was probably not an error as well. And it's one of those plays where, like, I actually thought Tim Dillard made a good point. Like, when somebody runs towards the corner and it hits the wall and bounces away from them, and like AmFam, when it gets to that part where it juts out, nobody's calling an error on that. Adele took a bad route to it and it hit the wall, but it's not like it went through his legs or right net, like it went around him after it hit the wall. And to me, that's I could hear an argument for it. I'm not going to go to bat and be like, he should absolutely have an inside the Parker for that, but I could have seen an argument for it for sure.
So you're not going to take the Vinny Rotino route on the post game where he was adamant that it should be an inside the Parker. We love Vinny. We're not trying to bash Vinny here. Vinny's a great analyst. But Churio with that hit right there, and then he hit a sac fly in the 6th. Tobias Myers continued his run of solid pitching. 6 1/3 for him, 4 hits, no earned runs, 2 walks, 6 strikeouts. It was nice to see a little bit more swing and miss out of him in this outing. Granted, he's not facing a great lineup, but still, I think he's really, like we've talked about before, settling into a pitch mix that works for him. The slider was playing really well off the fastball in this game. He had a lot of sequences where it was the fastball up and then putting guys away with the slider low and off the plate. Tobias Myers has now allowed just 1 earned run in 20 1/3 innings pitch across his last 3 starts. I think you can also put him in the camp of someone who's very much benefiting from the defense right now. If you look at a lot of the underlying metrics, they're not good. And I'm saying this as someone who was very high on Tobias Myers going into the year and who does still like Tobias Myers a lot moving forward. I think it's possible to say he is throwing the ball a lot better than he was early in the year, so there has been progress. But he's also getting help from the defense behind him. I think there is always the element you got to consider in this of, does this mean guys are doing a good job of pitching to the team that they have behind them? Right. And I think that is a factor as well, and that's admittedly hard to quantify. But in this game, he was pretty solid. I go back to the Detroit when he got a lot of weak contact. His following start, he was getting hit pretty hard, and the defense was making a lot of plays behind him. Was that the start against Toronto, I believe it was?
Yep.
Where it was, and that was part of the reason I think why Murphy gave him a quicker hook in that one. But he threw the ball well in this one. Bottom line, though, you don't get to 1 earned runs in 20 1/3 innings based purely on luck. I think it's just that, like when you have a stretch like that, it's a combination of everything going right for you. Like you are making some good pitches, but you're also, getting some plays made behind you. But either way, no matter how you slice it, he's done a good job of bolstering this Brewers rotation that needs some innings right now. So good to see Tobias having success. And again, I do like that we started to see a little bit more swing and miss in this. If he throws a ball the way he did in this outing, then it really is going to be legitimately good performance that is backed up by a lot of the peripherals. So good to see that from him. The Brewers, however, almost denying Tobias Myers of a win in this start due to an interesting 9th inning. Eliezer Hernandez got the ball with a 6-0 lead in the 9th. He gave up 2 hits and threw 2 wild pitches, at which point he was pulled from the game. And as Murphy went out to make the call to the pen, the first thought in my head was that is a potential DFA-able outing. And Eliezer Hernandez was in fact DFA'd before the final game of this series. We'll get to that in a couple minutes. But Yoel Payamps came in. He wasn't very good either. I know I hadn't seen for sure how much throwing he did in that 9th inning. I think he had to get back up pretty quickly, but he had also been warming the inning before, so I don't think there's an excuse there in terms of not being ready. Like he had been throwing for a bit the inning before. So I think it is solely on him for coming into the game and not having his command. But he gave up 2 hits, issued a walk, at which point Trevor McGill came into the game and made what I thought was a really bad pitch call. And I guess that's not strictly McGill's fault. You have to look at both McGill and Contreras in that sequence. But Trevor McGill came in. He's facing Taylor Ward. He gets to 2 strikes on him. And the one curveball he threw earlier in the sequence was like a 55-foot curveball that he spiked. And it seemed like he and Contreras essentially decided that they were just going to attack with fastballs after that, because I don't know if they just after seeing that, they didn't feel he had a good feel for the curveball going into that inning, whatever it is. But it seemed very obvious. And Brian Anderson even said this on the broadcast, like, well, after that pitch, you can, if you're Ward, you can pretty much rule out the curveball and just sit fastball. And it was pretty clear that's what he was doing. They still got a late swing on one of them because he fouled it back towards the right side. So he was still late, but you could see he was looking for it. You could see he was getting closer to timing it up. McGill throws another fastball, which in and of itself, I just wouldn't throw a fastball in general. I think that you take the gamble with throwing another curveball there. Like, and again, like given the game situation, it would have taken a home run to tie it. And assuming that he's not sitting on a curveball, I think you can still get away with a bad one that's over the plate.
Yep.
The worst case scenario is really if you spike another one. But again, because you're still ahead by a few runs, spiking a curveball doesn't actually do a whole lot in changing the way that the game could end. Like, it is still going to take the home run for him to tie it up. But they go to another fastball. This one was almost middle, maybe a little bit towards the upper half of the zone, but essentially middle. Ward was waiting for it. Ward drove it to center field, but Sal Frelick making a game-ending home run robbery at the wall. Another game during this stretch for the Brewers that ends with a web gem. So, again, credit to the defense. The Brewers winning games because of their defense on this stretch, and I think that was a very good way to demonstrate it. Really nice play by Sal, and this kind of leads me into what's become a little bit of a debate on some corners of Brewers Twitter and StatCast HQ.
Kurt.
The catch probability for this one, I believe Kurt Hogue tweeted it out. I think he said it was in like 95%. And this is now the second time in a few weeks where we've had a home run robbery by a Brewer. The last one was by Blake Perkins that had a catch probability near 100%. So that's kind of led to a debate about all this. And I'm actually going to play devil's advocate on this one a little bit because this play by Sal, like the jump is obviously very impressive, but he was shaded back. He didn't actually have to cover that much ground. He even said it in the postgame. He was like, I had to take 3 steps and I was at the wall. So, and these are obviously good plays, but one thing that's interesting to me as well is, so between the comments that Sal made about that catch, but also when Perk robbed that home run, we talked to him about it because I was at home. He said something similar. He's like, honestly, that play is pretty routine for me because I practice it. It's, you get a good read on the ball, obviously, but then you get back to the wall. If you're comfortable with the wall and you're aware of it, like you jump. And, if it's there, you're going to catch it. If it's not there, it's a home run. Like, so it's an interesting discussion now because I don't know. I'm not going to go so far as to say the catch probabilities are completely right. I think there is a discussion to be had about the way that's all modeled. I think especially with the wall being involved. Like, I think you can make an argument that StatCast maybe isn't properly judging the amount of skill that comes into making the leap and timing the leap, because timing is big too on plays like this. It's not just get to the wall and jump. Like, you have to time the jump right.
Right.
And maybe that's something that it's really missing, because I think that could be something that does separate the guys who are good at this versus your standard outfielder. Because if you look at catch probability, you might think, well, this is a play that every standard outfielder should make. Well, no, like Kyle Schwarber is not making the leaping home run grab that Sal Frelick is or that Blake Perkins are, and not that Kyle Schwarber ever plays the field anymore. But it's an interesting discussion to have. I don't know how do you feel about the way that StatCast gauges these kinds of plays?
Well, first of all, I would pay a lot of money to watch Kyle Schwarber play center field. That would be incredible television. But in terms of the StatCast thing, I think it would just be a completely different level of what they have to measure to be able to include walls in this. And that means you'd have to worry about the height of the fielder, because for Sal, it's a harder play than it would be for some of the other people because he's short. He has to jump higher than other people do for that ball. But I get why they basically have thrown it out as like, okay, well, it happens sometimes. It probably doesn't make sense fully, but it's just kind of what we're going to have to deal with. Like, there's going to be some home run robberies that don't really add up compared to all the other plays that happen. And what are we talking? Maybe 20 home run robberies a year around the league, maybe a little bit more. It seems like they're happening more lately, actually.
There have been a lot. I know Murph said on the post game last night, if anyone was watching Brewers Live, that there's just perception wise, it feels like there's been a lot this year.
Yeah. Now that I think about it, the Brewers have had at least 3 or 4 robbed, and Willie, I think, has had all of them robbed on his own. It's like he's been the one getting hurt by that a lot this year. But I guess I can't get worked up about it. Like I don't really care either way is where I land on it. Like I would love, it'd be cool if they could figure out a way to do all of that and make it more clear. Like, hey, this home run robbery is better than this home run robbery and all that. But I would imagine that's pretty difficult. They're already doing quite a bit with the cameras that they have. And I would think that trying to get like jump height and all of that stuff included would just be difficult. It'd be fun to see, though. I'd love to see which outfielders have big verts. That would be a fun thing to look at. But yeah, I just don't care too much. It's funny to watch some of the arguments going back and forth, though. I've been entertained on Twitter by it.
I'm comfortable with saying that it's just not designed to capture plays like that.
Yep.
Like you can find the value in it elsewhere, but just acknowledge it's not designed to capture plays like that. And I think that's kind of where we can leave it and just kind of approach it that way. But kind of moving on here to game 3. Before the game, as we talked about, Hernandez was DFA'd. Bradley Blaylock was recalled from the minor leagues. An additional move as well, Oliver Dunn sent back down to Nashville. Tyler Black recalled from AAA. So I guess this kind of brings us into our first question specifically for Spencer. Spencer, would you like to introduce this question and answer it? Because it does relate to Tyler Black.
Yes. HC Purdy asks, Spencer, you have mentioned that you don't think Tyler Black can play first base. What aren't you seeing from him that leads to this conclusion? For what it's worth, his fielding percentage on Baseball Reference the last 2 years at first base is fairly good, 987 and 985 respectively. So here's what I will say. First, I want to start off by saying fielding percentage for me is more or less worthless when you're judging defense. Now, a huge outlier, a guy with an 800 fielding percentage over the course of a long time is a bad defender who makes way too many errors. Keston Hiura, whether he had good range or not, made way too many errors for that spot. But generally, I don't care too much about it because it just, there's a lot of things that aren't factored into that. And one of those being range. And I would say that's actually the one thing that Black does decently. He does get to some balls that other first basemen wouldn't because he's a better athlete than most first basemen are. The issue I see is that his footwork is really clunky, and we're talking 2 months of playing first this season where it really isn't looking any better to me. His feet are always moving around trying to find the base. He does not do a very good job picking the ball or scooping the ball on throws. And honestly, for me, one of the biggest jobs for a first baseman is saving other players' fielding percentage. You're not getting an error if you miss a pick. Like, that's going to be a throwing error. But a first baseman should be able to make most of those routine picks at first base. And I've watched Rhys Hoskins play first base enough now, and I'm pretty comfortable saying that I think Tyler Black is worse at first base currently than Rhys Hoskins, and that's bad. That's really, really bad. I'm not ruling it out that it won't ever happen, that he couldn't be a good first baseman, because like I said, he's a very good athlete. But right now, it's rough, and I don't have a ton of belief that he's going to figure it out there. And I guess I'll just go back to my I think he's going to end up in the outfield if he ends up playing a real defensive spot. And we already know that's a bit of a logjam with Brewers outfielders. Whether all of them work out or not, or any of them work out, we'll find out. But it will make it even more difficult, I think, for him to see the field if he can't figure it out at first. And I'm just not. We might get to see it this week. Maybe he'll get a chance, but I would imagine not. I would think it would just be Rhys or Bowers playing over there while he's up. So I don't know. That's the thing. I guess to sum it up, the fielding percentage is fine. It's not a ton of errors or anything like you said, but it's just not good fundamentally around the base, and it's costing other people errors. And that's, to me, the most important part about a first baseman's job. So
I guess when I saw that he's back up here, because my full belief is that the reason he wasn't up here is because of the defense. Like, there's just no use right now on this team for a left-handed hitting DH only player. So I guess I was kind of wondering, like, now when he's back, like, is it? I'm guessing we're just going to see he's here to DH against righties in this Padres series. Like, there's still not a good fit for him on the roster. So I was a little surprised to see that he's back. Granted, I'm glad Dunn's going back down. I think he never should have come back up because I think he's
Right.
always just needed the at bats in Nashville. Like you could, I think there was a way to keep Ollie Dunn down there and Tyler Black down there and whatever you call up like a reserve outfielder again or something if you want speed on the bench or whatever that may be. But I'm guessing that it's DH at bats for Black against some of these righties. They just like the matchup for him. Like there's still no clear path to consistent playing time.
Yeah, that's where I'm at. I'd imagine maybe Bowers and him. We should note Reese has really struggled for a few weeks here. He has not been hitting well. But I know it's 4 righty starters in this Padres series, so maybe they're just planning on Bowers at first and Black at DH, or maybe, Yelich might get a day or something, but Black at least gets a few days of DH in there. Otherwise, I'm wondering if there's been like a bunch of opportunities where they wanted to pinch hit with Dunn, but they didn't really actually want to pinch hit with Dunn, and they think that maybe they'll be able to use Black more often or something.
Maybe.
Black can run, so he can be a pinch runner, but again, that's not what you want to bring one of your top prospects up to be, is a pinch runner, pinch hitter. Like you want him to play regularly. So maybe he'll just be up for this Padres series and they'll burn another one of the options for the season and send him back down. And maybe that's when we see a Mitchell come back or something. I'm not sure, but it does feel weird to just swap those two. Like, I don't really get it, but that's all I can think of.
Yeah. I'm still not convinced that this is going to be a lasting stint for him either. I feel like it's going to be pretty similar to the other one where it's maybe they just really liked this run that they're in right now in terms of getting matchups for him. But like the viability this season on the roster has not changed since the last time he was up here. So it's kind of interesting to see. But he wasn't in the lineup for game 3 because the Brewers are facing a lefty, Tyler Anderson. Spencer, do we have any updates on that game?
Yes. The Brewers are up 2-0 in the bottom of the 8th. Brian Hudson is on the mound for his second inning. 1 out, 0-2 count on Rengifo. So that's where we're sitting right now.
Looks like Freddie only gave 5 base runners in 6 innings with 8 Ks, so that's good to see.
Yeah, I was looking. How many whiffs did he end up on the fastball? It was in a pretty good spot at one point. And of course, Savant's not loading for me anymore, but he was in a good spot.
I'll take your word for
he had
it.
at least 10 through the 5th inning.
Okay.
Yeah. Either way, good start for him. It seems like 10 whiffs on 30 swings on the fastball. So pretty decent. He got a lot of whiffs. 37% whiff rate for the game. So overall, really solid game for him.
That is very good.
Yeah.
We'd like to see very good things. So hopefully the Brewers can hold on to that one and pick up another series win, despite, again, arguably maybe not playing the greatest baseball, though. It sounds like, however, based on how Freddie threw the ball today, that this actually is a good pitching performance that deserves a lot of credit. So, but certainly good to see. With that, we're going to move on to the loose ends portion of the program, just answering a couple of other questions that we got from listeners that we did not opt to work into the week in review. We'll start first with a question from Richard, who sent this via email. He asked, what do you guys think about Yelich's power numbers since returning from the back injury? He did send this before Yelich hit the home run, I should note. But he goes on to say, he hit 5 home runs pre-injury, seemed to be closer to his 2018 power form. Now, since being back, that seems to have disappeared again, and I worry it's directly related to his back. And if he hits for power, it makes the back vulnerable. I don't think hitting for power makes the back vulnerable. I don't think that has anything to do with anything really, but I do think you're right that the back injury saps him of some power. And I don't think he's ever in a good spot if he's having to be conscious of that. And I don't know if that actually is, how he feels right now. It could just be the timing was so locked in. And then when you're off for 3 weeks and you don't go on a rehab assignment, especially, like you're probably not going to come back in that same zone. But I do think that the back is probably going to keep Christian from ever maintaining that power form. I think it's very much still in there and we see spurts of it.
Oh yeah.
I just don't expect that the back is ever going to consistently be healthy enough that he's going to be able to stay in that zone consistently. And it's just kind of an unfortunate reality that the Brewers are going to have to live with. The good news is that as long as he's capable of being in the lineup and the back isn't actively bothering him all the time, like he is still a good hitter.
Oh yeah.
Like now basically it's like kind of where we're at now is he started out looking closer to how he did as an MVP. Back injury flared up. He missed 3 weeks. He comes back now. He's just Marlins Yelich again, where it's
Yep.
I'm gonna just kind of hit the ball to all fields and hit a lot of line drives and use the speed to leg out some infield hits. Like that's still a good player too. So you're not in a bad spot where essentially the two paths are he's amazing, like elite, or he's still really good. So, but I do think that the back injury is always going to be something to think about. It's never going to go away. It's kind of like the line you always pull out, Spencer. Like you don't formerly have had a bad back. Like
Yep.
once you have the bad back, it's not going away for good. But I do think it is going to be something that for the rest of his career is probably going to stop him from consistently being in that zone.
Yep. I'm with you. Yeah, I don't think that they're related in the way of he's afraid to open it up for power because of his back, but I do think when he is hitting, when his back is bothering him, it becomes difficult for him to open it up and hit for power. But honestly, I think more than anything, some of it still does come back to, I think he had his timing down to like a science early in the season, and he was in one of those grooves where he was just seeing the ball really well, consistently on time, catching the ball out in front. And he has spurts like that every year, really. I mean, his power tends to come in spurts more now, especially than it did. But even back to 2018, like all of a sudden it just exploded after the All-Star break because he found his timing and he never really lost it. I do think that's a really big part of it. And since he's come back, like you said, he's still hitting well. It just hasn't been of the home run variety very often. So I personally still think like a 25 homer season is not out of the question. I would not be surprised by that at all. But it's not something where I'm anticipating him at hitting 30 ever again. Like I don't know that I would ever expect him to do it. But I think he's just going to be a streaky power guy. And when he's not got the power going, he's still going to be a good hitter. And that's, if he's in the lineup, pitchers are still afraid of him. Frankly, they've been afraid of him even when he wasn't hitting that well. He got walked all the time. He got intentionally walked even when pitchers fear Christian Yelich. So him being in the lineup, whether he's actually hitting for the power or not, I think pitchers are still afraid to challenge him with stuff because they know he's capable of it and he can turn around and hit a ball 420 feet like he did in game 2 of this Angels series. So the threat is more important than anything else, I think, for him.
Cheesehead Kami asks us, incredible username there, Cheesehead Kami. He asks, what are some of the under-the-hood stats that show Yoel Payam's regression this year? He seems to have gone from top setup man in the NL last year to simply a decent middle-inning reliever this year. I kind of looked into it a little bit. It's really just all the slider. He's not throwing the same kind of slider he was throwing last year. The movement is down a little bit. It's still above average, but it's down a little bit. He's lost some of the lateral movement on it that he added last year. And he's also just catching a lot more of the plate with it. If you look at the heat maps, he did a really good job of keeping it either in the lower glove side third of the zone last year or down and away out of the zone. This year, it's just catching a lot of the middle right now. And I think that's really where everything starts for him. The fastballs have both been very effective still. And he's actually made the adjustment that I wanted him to make this year, which is one, throwing more four seamers, and two, when he throws a two seamer, you can tell he's more focused on just getting it in instead of getting it down, because his two seamer is really more of a runner than it is a sinker. So really he's going to get outs with that pitch by jamming guys instead of getting rollovers necessarily. So I like how he's using both of the fastballs, and they've both been effective for him still. The four seamer is getting a ton of whiffs. The two seamer, the results on that pitch have gotten way better this year. Like it didn't actually have great plate appearance outcome results. It was still useful in the context of setting up his slider, but the slider itself is really what it all comes down to. It's just not as good as it was last year. And that's resulted in a couple of different trends. His left on base rate is down from 81% to 68.7% this year. I would guess that that's still going to trend up a little bit because that can sometimes just be more of a luck-based stat based on sequencing, especially as the sample size kind of gets a little bigger here. The strikeout rate is down from almost 27% last year to about 21% this year, which has also been a big difference for him. Just fewer plate appearances in which you're controlling the outcome of that plate appearance directly as a pitcher. His hard hit percentage and his barrel rates are way up. The barrel rate has more than doubled from about 4.8% to 10.4%. And yeah, it all just comes back to the slider for me because we're really not seeing damage on any other pitches. It's just the slider that's essentially gone from a plus pitch to, I believe by run value, it's in the negatives this year. So that's really what I've seen from him. Spencer, have you seen anything different, the same? Just kind of what's your take on UL Piumps this year?
Yeah, I didn't do nearly as much research, but I would have guessed the slider was a pretty big issue based on what we've been seeing. And it does just feel like command-wise, he's making mistakes in some pitchers' counts, and that's probably mostly been with the slider. And then still, there is an element of just he probably had some decent luck last year compared to what he maybe deserved, and I think this year he's probably had some bad luck on some of these things. It's just regression in some ways to the luck factor, but also
his FIP is lower this year than it was last year, actually. But some of the other estimators as well say he's been worse. So it's just kind of how are you choosing to evaluate him a little bit?
Okay, yeah, I wouldn't. I have nothing different than what you had on this one. I pretty much agree with what you said. I don't have anything to add.
Move on to our next question then. Tony Plush's takes. We love a Tony Plush reference. That was a fun year, 2011. Oh, yeah. Tony Plush. He asks, as well as the starting pitching has done so far, we all obviously agree that a trade should be made before the deadline. Going off of prior deadlines for this team, we won't make the headliner splash. With that said, who are some options the Brewers should be checking in on that are not a headliner like Garrett Crochet? I know you have a name, Spencer. Would you like to start with your name?
I put a bunch of names down for this one, but I can start with one. Yeah. Luis Severino is one, but I'm going to push past him because the Mets have gotten a little hotter, and I don't know that they're going to be as willing to sell as I thought like 4 days ago. But I do think he would be a really nice addition. Now, that would be a bigger name, and I guess you could argue as a headliner, it's just a rental headliner. But for a smaller name, the team that surprises me record-wise the most this year is the Rangers, and I think Andrew Heaney would be an interesting pickup. Last year for him, I believe they're 7.5 games out of the wild card right now, so I think there's a pretty good chance they're going to sell. Now, they do have the type of talent that could make a run up until the deadline, and all of a sudden they're not selling, but he would be a really interesting rental 1 year that I don't think would break the bank, but I think would be a really nice fit for the team.
I'm surprised. I was expecting you to say Trevor Williams because that was the one that you had thrown out.
I forgot
before.
about him.
Forgot about him. Heaney's. I hadn't even thought about Heaney, to be honest with you, because I felt that, like, despite the record, the Rangers just are not going to sell. Like, they're going to be the team that says, no, we believe in our guys just based on the veterans we have, what we did last year, and just hold serve or even buy at the deadline and hope that kind of sparks something. Like, they kind of reminds me a little bit of the Braves a few years ago, where they were underperforming and then they bought aggressively at the deadline, and the additions they brought in worked out really well. And things obviously that was the year they won the World Series, wasn't it? It was 21 when they did that. So everything worked out really well for them on that front. Like, I could see that kind of happening again with this Rangers club. But yeah, if he's available, he's an interesting name. I've had my eye on him for a while now, just as a guy who the stuff and the potential are there to be quite good, and it just hasn't come together consistently. So maybe you get him in this pitching development organization, get him in front of this defense. My big thing with the Brewers acquiring starting pitching, and this kind of comes back to just what we've been talking about with the defense. My belief is really growing that the Brewers have a defensive unit where you can plug just about anybody in and they're going to be passable. Like, we've kind of seen this right now. Like, again, with Myers is up here doing well. And it really just seems like if you throw strikes, the Brewers are going to make plays behind you. Like that's what's been a big thing for Toby Myers is he's just throwing more strikes now and he's not walking guys. And it's worked for Colin Ray. It's working for Bryce Wilson most of the time. And even Bryce Wilson doesn't throw that many strikes. Like he walks more guys than he should. But he's outperforming what you would expect. Like I very much believe that the Brewers are going to take that into account and just kind of pick a lower name or a lesser name off of the trade market. I keep going back to Quintana. I feel like that's just a good fit for them, all things considered.
Yeah, I do have him down. I get it.
I know you don't like it, but that's the one name that I just can't get out of. But like guys in that vein, like Gio Gonzalez is like the Gio Gonzalez comparison to what they did in 18. Like I feel like that's the kind of guy that they're going to go for this year. Like the guy who
I did
the
have Ross
results
Stripling down too.
Okay, yeah. Just like the guy who the results aren't good. Maybe none of the peripherals are great, but veteran guy, he's been around. You put him in front of this defense, hope he gives you some stability. But it also depends on where the Brewers are at health-wise at the deadline as well. I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that they're necessarily going to trade for a starter. I still think it's more likely than not. But if you get to a spot where all of a sudden guys come back healthy and things have settled down a little more, I don't know if the Brewers will go out and get someone. They've always been an organization that has more than anything just played according to what's available on the market more so than what their needs are. Granted, last year the offense was so bad that they just had this extreme need for offense, and they kind of operated a little bit differently last year where you could tell they were like, we're getting bats. And Matt Arnold actually did a very, very good job of that, getting a couple bats in a seller-friendly market. So that was actually, in my opinion, it was probably one of their better deadlines ever in terms of how they did with what was available. But I guess that's kind of besides the point. Those are some names that we have just in terms of guys the Brewers could go after. Don't expect them to land like a Crochet or anyone, kind of like you acknowledged in your question. That's not the kind of route the Brewers are probably going to take. I did just touch on some in-house options coming back, and the final question we'll take addresses one of those guys. Tyler asked us, do you think there's a likelihood we see Taylor Clark in the majors soon to fill innings? I think there is. He's building up in Nashville. He's been down there for, I want to say it's been about a month now. And
it's close, yeah.
Yeah, he's at a point where I do think we're going to see him back. What was officially his rehab assignment only lasted like 2 outings, and then they optioned him. But that more than likely had to do with him closing in on the service time cutoff for being able to reject an optional assignment. So essentially what they did was they cut the rehab short and just optioned him to AAA while they still could to continue building out down there. But I do think we're going to see him soon. And Pat Murphy kind of hinted on the last homestand that he's a lot closer to being in a spot where he is ready to fill some innings. And I think we'll see him sooner than later.
Yeah. He threw 92 pitches tonight in his start. So
yeah,
he seems to be getting
they're stretching him out. Like they want him to be a starter. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we're going to see him pretty soon. Especially with there's still some uncertainty surrounding, like, is DL Hall going to come back as a starter?
Right.
Where's he at? We're going to see Clark make starts before DL Hall, I think, if I had to guess. But I guess as long as we're talking about what's going on in the minor leagues and some rehab assignments, we can officially pivot to Spencer Michaelis's favorite section of the pod, and that would be Spencer's minor league sandbox. You got some performances to highlight for us this week. Would you like to take it away?
Oh, I would love to take it away, Jack.
All right, you can take it away.
By far, I think what you meant was the best segment. You said my favorite, but I think you meant the best segment of the podcast, but it's okay. Starting off, we'll look at some pitching performances like we normally do. We'll start off with Yorman Galindez. I have talked about him a few times on here. 21 years old in low A. Fastball is up to the mid-90s. 2 really good breaking balls that he kind of mixes the planes on, so you could argue it's 3. So far in June, he has a .75 ERA in 12 innings with 18 strikeouts. Just a really good start to the month for a guy who struggled a little bit in May, not badly, but really good start to the year. A little bit of a downturn in May. nice to see him pick it back up just to see that he's capable of doing that. Another name we've talked about a few times, Tate Keener. He continues to pitch really well. Honestly, he might be due for a AA promotion here soon. After tonight, his June ERA is 2.11, 17 innings pitched with 20 strikeouts, 7 walks at high A. Just really decent stuff. He gets a lot of whiffs, kind of a weird angle from the left side. So an interesting arm that they've stretched out to be a starter that I really wasn't expecting him to be a starter, but he's doing pretty well. Moving on, we'll talk about Aiden Maldonado. So he was a 14th round pick out of Minnesota in 2022. Really interesting. In spring, he started to stand out to some scouts, and then he had a really good start to the year. His stuff is pretty electric. It all moves a ton. He can get into the mid-90s with the fastball. I think the slider is the best secondary, but the changeup looks pretty good at times too. Also a curveball, not my favorite, but he at least can use it to kind of change the velocity that hitters are seeing, as most of the fastballs are mid-90s, slider and changeup are kind of the same velocity, so the curve gives another velo that they have to worry about. But he slowed down a lot after a good start last year. His walk numbers got pretty high, almost 6 per 9. However, he really didn't allow a ton of hard contact. His FIP was 2 runs lower than his ERA, and he spent the second half of the season on the IL. So it was kind of an up and down year. He showed a lot of the flashes. He had a bit of a rough start this year, but again, a lot of the peripherals pointed to a guy who is pitching a lot better. Since May 15th, he's gone 17 1/3 innings out of the pen, 24 strikeouts, only 5 walks. Like I said, pretty good stuff. Good strikeout to walk ratio lately, and really for the whole season, that's been in a good spot. He just had some tough luck early on. So another guy that might move up, and like I said, the stuff plays. I think he could be a pretty interesting relief prospect. And then the final pitcher we're going to talk about is Chad Patrick. We've talked about him a couple times, I believe, but he was acquired for Abraham Toro from the A's this offseason. He honestly, we talked about starter options internally. He might deserve a chance to fill one of these soon. Since the beginning of May, his ERA is 2.08 over 47 2/3 innings with a 28% strikeout rate and a 7% walk rate. His whip is only 1.05. He's throwing his cutter as his primary pitch in like the 87-ish range. It has a 34% whiff rate against it and an expected weighted on base average of 307, which is a pretty good spot for any fastball. His four seam's only like 93, but it's got a pretty good vertical approach angle and a whiff rate of 33% on it since the beginning of May. So 2 pitches that get a lot of swing and miss. He also throws a slider that has a 44% whiff rate in that time, but he does struggle to land that one for strikes, and he only uses it around 9-10% of the time. But 3 pitches that I think will play pretty well, and he throws a sinker and a changeup. I don't love either of those, but I think it's a good idea to at least have something going the other direction since everything else is pretty much moving to that glove side. But that's a guy I really would not be surprised to see in the majors at some point this year. And when they made the trade, he really just looked like depth. And right now he's kind of turning himself into an actual prospect. He's only 25 years old. He's the same age as Gasser and DL Hall. So somebody to watch for sure. Moving to the offensive side, we're going to talk about Luke Adams, who we've talked about, I think, the last 2 weeks before this too, but he is red hot right now. 65 plate appearances in June coming into tonight, a 1065 OPS, including 3 homers, 4 doubles, and a triple. Even just looking beyond the box score, he's so fun to watch. Like, if you have a chance to watch a Timber Rattlers game that he's playing in, you're going to see him amped up. He is always fiery. He's always intense. And he also just seems like he's having a ton of fun the whole time he's playing. So very, very fun to watch him play. And it's just kind of a funny stat, I guess. He's at 234 plate appearances this year, and he has been hit 17 times. So he's putting Mark Canha to shame here. Like, this is a higher rate than Mark Canha has ever come close to. 7.2% hit by pitch rate, which that would be a decent walk rate for some hitters, and he's doing it 7.2% of the time. He's also walked at a 16% rate. So his on base is carried a lot by the walks and the hit by pitches, but and Jack will tell you, but I firmly believe that hit by pitches are a skill, and being willing to wear a pitch is a skill. And that many in that few of plate appearances points to somebody who's very much willing to stand in there and take a pitch. He did have 21 last year as well, so this is not something new. Dylan O'Ray, another guy who gets hit a lot, actually, but Dylan O'Ray was promoted to Double-A. He was the Brewers' third-round pick that none of the experts had heard of when the Brewers made the pick a couple years ago. He had the 11th lowest whiff rate in high A, though I should point out that his swing rate is in the 7th percentile, which to me shows a possibility that he's simply smart enough to know that high A pitchers just don't throw that many strikes. So if you're just taking a bunch of pitches, you can draw a lot of walks. You can only swing at pitches that you know you're going to get the bat on. But it's still not a bad thing to have that sort of approach and show that level of bat to ball skills. He did start showing a little bit more impact on the ball lately too. He had a couple flies to the wall. He had a couple foul balls that would have been gone if they were fair. He has to 0 in terms of extra base hits on his ledger over the course of his career so far. So even though that sounds dumb that he was flying out to the wall and hitting some foul ball homers, it's nice to see an ability to drive the ball a little bit, even if it's not really showing up in the stat sheet yet. But I have to note, I think this is a really aggressive assignment for him. He is 20 years old. He's not like dominating high A. I'm just not super confident it's going to go well. I think he'll probably be able to steal bases still. He'll play good defense. He plays second base and outfield, and he does both of those well. But I think the bat could struggle for a little bit here. We'll find out. I hope I'm wrong. He's definitely an interesting player, so I'm not going to complain if he does well here. But moving on to Josh Adamczewski. He was last year's 15th round pick out of a high school in Indiana. He shows some decent pop and a really good feel for the barrel. I had not heard of him before the pick, but the swing stood out immediately when I started looking into him. It's not I wouldn't say the cleanest looking swing, but I shouldn't, the cleanest looking operation. The swing itself is really good. He gets into a really good spot when he's actually going. But he had a little bit of some extra movement early on. Haven't seen as much video lately. He may have been able to clean that up, but so far in the Arizona Complex League, after missing the first month due to injury, 35 plate appearances, he has 10 walks to 8 strikeouts, 3 doubles, and a 1,001 OPS. So a really good start to his, not technically his career. He had like 8 plate appearances last year, but a pretty good start to this season. And he's only 19. He will be the whole season. So another interesting guy from the 2023 draft class that just continues to be the gift that keeps on giving. And then a couple more DSL updates for the guys that I just have to talk about every time. Jesus Mate, who has been getting a lot of love lately, he has just continued to hit. He had his second home run this week, and I believe I forgot to update the OPS here, but his OPS is 1,200 still. Just a really, really good start for him. And then for Luis Pena, he's up to 43 plate appearances. His OPS is 1,281. He has 2 doubles and a homer, so there's been some decent pop. He's hitting .577, and he is 20 of 20 on stolen base attempts in 10 games. He's been walked 4 times. He's had 2 hit by pitches and 5 strikeouts, so more free passes than strikeouts. But he's averaging 2 hits and 2 steals per game so far in his career, which is ridiculous. He's also getting a lot of attention nationally from some of the prospect people. And then a name that nobody really knew anything about coming into the season, but he's off to a really good start, Juan Ortuño. He's at 31 plate appearances. He's walked 7 times. He's also been hit 3 times. He's only struck out 3 times. He has a .581 OBP, 3 doubles and a triple, also 7 for 7 on steals. So no info on him as a prospect really, but clearly he seems to have a pretty good eye, good idea at the plate, a little bit of pop, and probably some speed with the steals too. So a name to monitor going forward, but that'll wrap it up for this one. And I got one minor league injury update, and I'll toss it back to Jack for the major league ones. Hayden Robinson, talked about him last time, off to a fantastic start in the Arizona Complex League. He unfortunately hit the IL after his latest appearance where he went 3 1/3, struck out 7. So we don't really know what it is, but I guess we'll stay tuned on that one because hopefully it's something minor. It's nothing related to an arm, but that's always the fear with a pitcher, obviously. So we will see where he ends up. But tough news for a guy who was seemingly starting to break out, and I would imagine was getting pretty close to a promotion to low A. So that'll wrap it up for the minor league portion of this. I guess this is minor league related. Garrett Mitchell is in AAA at the moment, rehabbing in the next step of his rehab, I should say. He had 2 home runs on Tuesday. He didn't have the numbers are okay. They're not great or anything, but it was nice to see him drive the ball. It's always nice to see him drive the ball. I think he's going to need to do that with how the rest of the profile shakes out offensively. There's going to need to be power there for it to be anything you can. If you're going to live with the rest of the profile, there's going to need to be pop. But Pat Murphy did say today, for now, Mitchell will be staying in AAA. So I don't know what that means. That could be literally one more day, but I'm guessing it means we're not going to see him until the homestand at the earliest once they get back from San Diego. JB Bukowskis had a setback after his most recent rehab appearance. He was feeling quote unquote significant shoulder discomfort after that appearance, but the imaging, Pat Murphy said today, showed nothing new. So once the pain subsides, he will just pick back up with his throwing, and hopefully this was just a small bump in the road and be able to get through it. I would love to be able to add him back to the bullpen at some point this year. And then on the Jacob Junis front, sounds like he is going to return for the Padres series. Now that everything went through and everything went well, I guess it must be in a pen role to start, or at least at the beginning he'd be available out of the pen. But I know he'd been stretched out a little bit, so maybe a bulk guy out of the pen. And then Robert Gasser for our final update here. Pat Murphy said today he received the same opinion from the third doctor that he went to that he did from the second one. Now it's pretty much up to Gasser to decide how he will proceed, whether that is the surgery or rehab. I'll share my opinion, Jack. You don't have to, but I think if they think that he should get surgery, that he should get surgery, and not what I think he would be doing is just pushing off the inevitable that he's going to need that surgery. And in that case, it would just end up costing him more time over the long haul rather than getting the surgery and just biting that bullet now and then coming back as soon as that rehab is over. But that's my opinion. Jack, feel free to share or not share.
I would be inclined to agree. Yes. Just get it out of the way. He can rehab it, but I think, again, like you said, you're kicking it down the line because from what we've gathered of the opinions he's gotten, especially from these last 2 doctors, is that the UCL is not very strong right now, so he is at risk of eventually ending up with a full tear. So yeah, just get it done right now, and then you're able to come back hopefully by mid-season 2025, and we'll go from there, I guess. I'm a little hurt, by the way. Like, you made it sound like I could jump back in towards the start of the injury updates, and then
I was
two
waiting for you
minutes go
to, and you
by.
never popped back onto my screen. So then I was
Well,
like,
I
all
thought
right,
you
I'll
were
just
gonna
do it.
like introduce me, like get me back in, but it never happened. But I
Yeah.
can do the Padres series preview, however, to close out this episode. Brewers are going to have a 4-game set with San Diego to wrap up their road trip. Thursday for game 1, we're going to see Bryce Wilson matching up against Adam Mazur. That game starts at 8:40 p.m. Central Time. Reminder, still West Coast games, so start times are going to be a little late here for a couple more days. Friday, we're going to see Colin Ray against Dylan Cease. Hopefully, we get another Colin Ray special. Technically, the last one didn't even qualify as a Colin Ray special because it was 6 innings. Like, he's outgrown it now at this point.
Colin Ray special plus.
Yeah, I'm coming up with new names now just to try to somehow continue to make a bit out of this. But it's kind of like the feeling of like It's like if you have like a kid who's like grown up and now he's doing his own thing and he's grown as a person. This is like watching Colin Ray mature into someone who has outgrown the Colin Ray special. And now he just gives you 6 instead of 5 every time out. On Saturday, we're going to have Carlos Rodriguez lined up to make his third MLB start opposite Randy Vasquez. That game starts at 6:15. And then for the getaway game, we are going to have Tobias Myers back on the mound against Michael King. The Brewers faced Michael King earlier this year, and he did a pretty good job against them. They were pretty overmatched by just about anything he threw at him. It's a good arsenal. He's got the sweeping slider. He's got the sinker. He's got a riding fastball that comes from this crossfire low release point that makes it very tough to pick up in the zone. I haven't looked at his numbers to see how he's doing this year since that outing, but he was a tough matchup last time, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's a similar story this time. It looks like you're looking up the numbers, but I'm not going to give you time to say anything because we got to wrap this show up. Thank you to everyone who followed along today. Yeah, that's right. I'm not even going to let you say anything.
It's okay.
Thank you
Throw in
to
that
everyone.
The Brewers won Game 3, 2-0.
Okay, you can say that. Yes, the Brewers did win Game 3 of the Angels series, 2-0. Trevor McGill picking up the save. I looked at the score while you were talking about the minor leagues for 85 minutes, but you kept it pretty short today. I'll give you some credit for that.
It's like 7 minutes.
Yeah, you did a good job. I'll stop dumping on you for that. But so yeah, to wrap up, I guess going back to the week in review, the Brewers did win both series that we covered this week after that win against the Angels. Nice work from Freddie Peralta and the bullpen doing a really nice job, and the offense just enough to come out ahead on that one. But as a reminder, you can follow me on Twitter at @ByJackStern. You can follow Spencer on Twitter at SMichaelis234. You can follow the pod on Twitter at BF_pod. You can send your questions to the podcast Twitter. You can email them to the podcast email. Either way, no matter how you want to send them in, we appreciate all of the engagement that we get each and every week. If we did not get to your question this week, do not feel like we overlooked you or we don't like you. I don't know. Maybe we don't like you, but we're not going to tell you for sure. But no, we appreciate all the interaction we get. We just try to work in as many of these as we can as time allows. And I guess with that, we will talk to you guys not the same time next week. Next week, we'll be able to record on a Thursday night again for a Friday release. But until then, thank you all for listening, and go Brewers.